Each week on Culinary Confidential, Christina Cates, a seasoned foodie who has worked at some of New York City's top restaurants, will share her passion for the culinary world. Whether you're a professional chef, a restaurant enthusiast, or a lover of good food, Christina dives into the heart of hospitality, exploring the trends, triumphs, and challenges facing the food service profession. And you won't want to miss her chats with some of the most interesting and influential industry voices. And now, please take your seat at the table as Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates starts now, exclusively on AM 970. The Answer.
Welcome to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates. This show is produced in association with my incredible friend, Lucas A. Ferrara. Before we get started with the main components of the show tonight, I want to mention that in New York City right now, Restaurant Week is going on. Restaurant Week is running from January 21st through February 9th in all 5 boroughs. You have the opportunity to try a restaurant you may not normally go to for an approachable price. Restaurants are offering a 2-course prefix menu for lunch or a 3-course prefix menu for dinner. So check it out. Go to newyorkcitytourism.com/Restaurant Week for more information. Okay, we are not doing Dry January here on Culinary Confidential. So, to continue with the beverage series that we started last week with King Cocktail himself, Mr. Dale DeGroff, I've centered this show all around the fascinating world of wine. As I mentioned last week, when I started the show in early fall of 2024, I had a ton of guests lined up for weeks ahead of time, so I didn't really have a chance to properly feature the importance of the beverage side of the industry. Tonight and next week's show will be solely beverage-related content. I can already tell you 1 hour is not going to be enough time for us tonight. Get ready for this. I have on the show tonight someone who is one of only 3 people in the whole entire world to simultaneously hold the titles of Master of Wine and Master Sommelier. The dedication and intense education and studying needed to accomplish this is no easy feat. My guest for the hour is Mr. Doug Frost. In addition to holding those titles, Doug's also an accomplished author of several books about wine that we will talk about during the hour and a wine consultant. Doug, along with his business partner Brad Bergman, own Echolands Winery in the Walla Walla Valley of Washington State. The winery owns almost 400 acres of land in that valley and 12 acres soon planted in the northern Walla Walla Valley and the foothills of the Blue Mountains. Each of Echolands' wines have received scores of 92 points or higher since the launch of their first wines from the 2018 harvest. Doug Frost, welcome to Culinary Confidential. What an absolute honor it is to have you on the show with me tonight.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure we will have some fun. Let's make some trouble, Christina.
Let's do it. I'm known for getting into trouble. I always try to do a pre-show call with my guests before I work on the episode to kind of gauge the vibe I have with them and just so I know how to structure the show. And I have to say, I really enjoyed our chat a few weeks ago and was really looking forward to taping this show with you tonight on so many levels.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm looking forward to it as well. We have some friends in common,
yes,
and some really, a good and dear old friend of mine that connected us, and so if your friend's a biz, well, then everything's perfect.
Aw, for example, last week I did the show with one of your BAR partners, Dale DeGroff. Now,
yes.
BAR stands for Beverage Alcohol Resource, and this is a 5-day program offered through the Culinary Institute of America. Can you tell us more about this program?
We founded the program about 20 years ago, and it was really an outgrowth of a program that an individual named Steve Olson, who is a mezcal and agave expert, a restaurateur of long standing, one of my dear friends, that he and I created way back in the early days, beyond most people's recollection. In the 90s, we started this program for what was called the Seagram Sterling School of Service and Hospitality. And it had been founded by the wonderful Evan Goldstein, Master Sommelier resident in California. And they wanted to create a spirits division because Seagram obviously had spirits as well. So Evan reached out to me and to Steve, and Steve and I created this program that toured around the country and then toured around the world. And it was a one-day, deep immersion into every category of spirits, blind tasting of spirits, blind tasting of cocktails,
Amazing.
discussions of all of that. And from that, frankly, the bar program was created. And that was created because Steve and I, but also Dale, also David Wendrich, also Paul Packold, we all found ourselves together at the San Francisco Spirits Competition and had this conversation and thought, let's join forces and make something bigger than what the Sterling School was. At that point, Steve brought along Andy Seymour, who he was working with, who was a logistics master. And the group of us, the six of us, from starting in about 2005, put this thing together, and it has the list of people who have been through the program is daunting and rather insane. I mean, when you talk about people like Julie Reiner and Audrey Saunders and Angus Winchester, I mean, it's just like if I start naming everybody who's been through the program, we'll just waste a lot of airtime. Yeah, we'll waste a lot of airtime. Bottom line is there's no question that every year when we do this 5-day program and I'm lecturing, I look out at the 75 or so faces out in the audience and think to myself, why the hell am I teaching them? They should be teaching me.
You're the wine guru.
Certainly what I bring to it is I create the examinations that we utilize to finalize who gets through the program. Most people do, and it's you can pass at varying levels. But I'm there very much not as a wine expert, but we do spend some time talking about fortified wines. I mean, let's face it, cocktails and fortified wines are as common as the martini, for God's sakes, or the Manhattan. So we talk about that, but more than production of fortified and aromatized wines, we're talking about sensory analysis. And that's something that's always been near and dear. Steve and I really focused on that back in the day, and that's to say, okay, there's 1,000 gins out there. How do you differentiate one from another, especially if you don't necessarily know what the botanicals in them are? Or even more importantly, you want to make sure you do know what the botanicals are, not what they told you, but what are they actually? We've been on this mission for 20 plus years to get people to blind taste spirits because, believe it or not, for many people at least, it's surprising, the spirits change. And so as happened with a very famous rye brand I'm not going to name a few years back, just to prove it to people, I said, okay, here's that particular rye whiskey that I bought today. Here's that bottle of the same stuff that I bought 2 years ago, and here's a bottle of the same stuff that I bought 4 years ago. And I didn't tell them any of that. I just said, here are 3 rye whiskeys, and they all wanted to know why one of them was so good and one of them was okay and one of them was awful. And I was like, it's the same brand. They're just like, what? And I was like, this is why you blind taste. Things change, and you as professionals, you as bar managers or bartenders, or, God forbid we should saddle them with the name mixologists. You're supposed to know. If not you, who?
I just wish I was a fly on that wall with you and your partners in one room. I mean, the conversations you must have, I can't even imagine.
Well, it's a great deal of fun, but I think the most fun of all, if I can, be honest about it, is that each class it's such a thing in itself, and the people who go through those 5 days, and they're really 14 to 16-hour days, as mad as that sounds. What's really amazing to me about it is that those people end up connected, but not just connected, but lifelong friends, lifelong colleagues.
Yeah.
It is, that watching that develop is just so awesome, and the faculty list has morphed. So now Steve and I and a woman named Sarah Tarone, we quote unquote run the thing, but the faculty list, the list of people who are lecturing and writing the materials and helping me with the exams is so much more diverse now, because we really were, let's face it, and I love Dale dearly, and I love David, and they both still show up to teach some classes, Paul and Andy have moved on, but it was, come on, let's be honest, old white guys, and it's like, come on, that's not who your audience is.
Right.
That's not who your bartenders are. That's not who your customers are. So now having people like, Tiffany Barriere or Ms. Frankie Marshall or Carl Franz Williams or, on and on, Anu Apte.
Diversity.
Shannon Mustafer. I mean, it just feels great. Tracy Franklin helps me with distillation. I mean, it really feels like we did what we intended to do, which was to try to help the industry grow and mature into an industry that didn't just take at face value what the marketers told you, and then that the same thing is happening, that we're not just a force for status quo, that we're actually listening to the people who matter, which are the people who are doing the work now. I haven't been behind a bar in decades. As a bartender, I help run a restaurant bar here in Kansas City where I live, but what do? I help make sure that the bartenders back there are getting what they need so they can do the creative and great work. And I just go, wow, this is delicious. It's like, I'm not doing that stuff anymore. So we need to be responsive to the people who are. And we are over half female and, 25% or so persons of color in the faculty now. And that was very much by design.
Why did you pursue a career in wine? Where did the inspiration come from?
Well, I certainly remember when I got the bug, and that was that I'd had a couple of wines, truthfully, a couple of wines, and but I was working I got hired in a fine dining restaurant in Kansas City, and the first weekend, the GM said, "Hey, we're going to do a contest. Whoever sells the most." And I don't remember what it was. Might have been Robert Mondavi, Cabernet, gets to take home a bottle of Robert Mondavi Cabernet, Reserve. I'm like, well, I can do that. So I did. I won the contest, and the sommelier came up to me and said, "You're pretty good at this stuff. How long have you been studying wine?" I'm like, "I don't know anything about wine. What are you talking about?" John Scuffney was his name, and he's still a friend and a mentor today. But he was just a kid from the Kansas City Art Institute at that point in time who also caught the wine bug and certainly went on to be president of the Napa Valley Vintners Association and has his own winery called Lang & Reed and yada, yada. But he just said, you seem to know something about wine. I was like, no, I have a degree in acting. I pretended to be John Scuffney at the table, and so I sold the most wine. He was like, well, you want to come to a tasting? I'm like, yeah. And he said, oh, cool. It's Bordeaux. It's going to be like second growth Bordeaux. Just bring $25 and, see you at 7:00 on Tuesday or whenever it was. And I'm like, after a couple of those, I'm like, what the hell? This is so cool. I had no idea this world even existed.
Right.
And
so
complex.
I just
and actually for me, it was just so exciting because I really do remember this weird moment when I became aware of the fact that I walked into a room and I smelled stuff. I know this sounds bizarre, but I just, I kind of just did dumb, at that point, Midwestern kid who's like, I don't know, does it smell like something? But all of a sudden you put all your energy to smelling these glasses of wine, and you do this for a few weeks, and suddenly it felt like the scales had fallen from my eyes, and I was seeing, or in this case, smelling things I had never really focused on before. And it was this abrupt change in the way I interacted with the world. And it was, well, I want to do this more.
I think it's important for people to align themselves with their natural talents and expand on that. And you've done that with wine. Sometimes you're just born with these things that you're good at, and there's no explanation why. You have a palate for wine. I took just the introductory course when I worked at Tavern on the Green of the Master Somm, the course, but I only did that first level and I passed it. And the gentleman who was running that told me, he goes, "You have a super palate." And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you can taste things and you know a lot about the wine just by drinking it. And I did nothing with it, clearly. But it's just something that came natural to me. Like when you smell it, you taste, like, the complex flavors of that wine. And it's not just red or white or rosé or whatever. Like, you can smell leather, you can taste the floral bouquets, and you clearly have that, because I mentioned earlier how you hold simultaneously the title of Master of Wine and Master Sommelier. That's unbelievable. The studying and intense just education you had to do for that. You got to tell me about that process.
Well, yeah, it is. It is definitely, you become master of minutia, but I do have two thoughts on that. One is, yeah, definitely, I'm one of those idiots that just thinks sticking your nose into a book and memorizing facts and figures is so much fun. And the geographic challenges of understanding wine, all that information. I love that stuff. So that was cool. And yeah, not everybody is that weird and goofy and able to grab a lot of minutia and retain it. But it's one of those things that I like to do. With regards to the MS, I'm an ex-actor, so the exam happens tableside in real life, in real time. You have to be on your toes, and I taught improv class, back in the day, and so I'm like, this is fun, and I come from the restaurant business. I was washing dishes at 14, and so that side of that program appealed to me. And the MW is a writing exam, and I always, from the time I was a little kid, believed myself to be a writer. And so writing, I think kind of my favorite moment I ever got feedback in the MW was I had to write an essay saying that was just titled The Life of a Bordeaux Vintner. The 1 year in the life of a Bordeaux vintner. And I wrote this essay and handed it to, and it was examined, and then the examiner came back to me and said, so when were you in Bordeaux? And I was like, and I'm like, I have never been to Bordeaux. Oh. And she's like, no, when were you there? I'm like, I've never been there. This is book learning, but I'm a mimic. And so, so all that aside, but here's the thing that I will say, and I truthfully believe this, that, the palate thing, anyone can learn to do this. As proof of it, if you will, I did a tasting I would do a series of tastings at the Epcot Food and Wine Fest down in Florida.
Awesome.
At Disney World. And after a while we decided, what's really fun, what people love is to do a blind tasting thing. And I'm like, what they really love is when I'm blind tasted on it too. So here's a list of 100 wines. And the guy who ran it was a smart guy. He eventually became a master sommelier, so definitely a smart guy. And I was like, just pick 6 wines. These are all good, I think, representations, but don't tell me what they are. And let's, blind taste it with the audience. And that was fun. And then one day we're doing it, and literally this woman is arguing with me saying, oh, no, you have a special palate. There's no way anybody else could do that. I'm like, that's nonsense. And then, my friend George is like, hey, Doug, we were supposed to start a minute ago. Start. I'm like, oh, great, let's get started. So everybody, you have 6 wines in front of you. And I turn and look at my glasses are empty. They forgot to pour me. And so I'm like, wait a minute, this is awesome. Here's what's going to happen. I picked somebody in the audience I knew. I said, you bring your 6 glasses up, sit down here so I can ask you questions. But the audience and I'm going to do it exactly the same way I always do. I'm not going to look at your wines. I'm not going to smell your wines. I'm not going to taste your wines. I'm just going to ask questions of the audience and of you. And I got 5 of the 6 wines right. He only got 4 of them right. And so, I looked at the woman. I'm like, this is what I meant. It's not that I have a better palate. It's that I know what the notes mean. I know which questions to ask so that you can figure out what the wine is, where it comes from, what it's made from, what vintage it's from, all of that stuff. And so it really is more an information gathering thing. But then, okay, last thing that I'll admit is that it's not normal. Let's say when I go and do a wine competition, you'll taste, I don't know, maybe 125, 150 wines in a day. And you do that every day. And it is not normal behavior to wake up on day 4 and go, ooh, can we do 150 wines again? That's not normal.
Exactly.
Okay. But and so I think there is that difference that some of us just get that bug, and it's so much fun that you want to do it forever. And so you do.
Right. Doug, hold on. We're going to go to commercial break. We'll be right back. You're listening to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970, The Answer.
Over the last 30 years, Newman Ferrara, a New York City law firm, has evolved into a national practice focused on real estate, commercial, litigation, civil rights, class actions, and other complex litigation, representing many of the city's largest property owners, managing agents, and thousands of tenants. Newman Ferrara handles some of the nation's most significant class actions and civil rights matters. Newman Ferrara at 1250 Broadway in New York City. Go online to newmanferrara.com. That's newmanferrara.com. Listen to the firm's name partner, Lucas Ferrara, every Saturday at 10 a.m. on Dottie Herman's longest-running real estate radio program, Eye on Real Estate, on AM 970. A real estate lawyer for 35 years, Lucas is a professor at New York Law School and is also a published author with books on real estate and New York's landlord-tenant law. Tune in Saturdays at 10 a.m. to hear Lucas's unique perspective and advice on Eye on Real Estate.
Welcome back to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970. The Answer.
Welcome back. On the show tonight, I am joined by Doug Frost, who is just a wine extraordinaire. He knows everything and everything there is about the wine biz. And before we went to break, we were talking about how he's taken the Master Sommelier course and the Master of Wine. He's achieved both. He's one of 3 people in the whole world that hold this title. And Doug, welcome back to the show. I wanted to ask you another question about this before we moved on to another topic. Were there any requirements or qualifications that you needed to be eligible to even apply to take these courses?
Well, today there are those sorts of prerequisites. Back then, it was, and I say back then because we were talking over a quarter century ago, the first person to get through both exams was a gentleman named Ron Wiegand, and he finished in 91, and then I finished both in 93. And there's actually now a 4th person who just passed in 24, in late 24.
Oh, very recent.
Who's based... Yeah, very recent. Benjamin Haska, who's a resident in Singapore. And then there's Eric Heemer, who passed maybe a decade ago, passed both exams maybe a decade ago, who lives in Miami. But yeah, back in the day, it was kind of like, hey, if you think you can do this, you start much as you did with the Master Sommelier. You start with an introductory program, and you have an exam there, and it's a high pass rate. With the CMS intro, it's like a 90% pass rate. The certified then is more like, maybe if you're lucky, about a 50% pass rate. Mm-hmm. Often it's a little less than that. And then the advanced is somewhere between 12 and 15% of the people taking it pass, and then the masters, typically we talk about 3 to 5% of people at the masters actually pass it. And the MW is sort of a similar pathway, different because it's so much a written examination, but similar, unfortunately, similar outcomes. That the number of people who actually finally pass the damned final exam is a small group.
All right, I want to talk about wine for beginners, because this world of wine can be very intimidating for people. I mean, some people just stick to what they know. I like a Pinot Grigio, I like a Cabernet, but they don't dive very deep into that. So I've been to restaurants before, like very, very nice restaurants, where you're handed that wine list it's so thick, it's like the Bible, and it can be very intimidating for people. Like, what suggestions do you give people on how to navigate through a hefty wine list?
Well, I would say, unless you're a geek, don't bother.
Just get the Somm to come over, right?
Yeah, exactly. Get somebody who wants to talk to you about wine. And the first question that should come out of their mouths is, what do you like to drink? It's not, well, tell me what you're having for dinner, and I'm going to match the wine exactly. Because most of us who've been waiters, and I spent years as a waiter, I have a 4-top. I have people going, well, I'm having the Dover sole. I'm having the right. pork chop. I'm having, the strip steak. And I'm having, whatever, duck confit. Could you pick us a wine to go with that? Short answer, no. No, I couldn't. That's why we do wines by the glass. It's like, I'm getting you a really nice unoaked Sauvignon Blanc. I'm getting you, frickin' California Cab, whatever. So, I think the first and foremost thing ought to be to have, if you can, a friendly conversation with someone, whether it's the server, whether it's the sommelier, just to say, well, here's a couple of wines I really like to drink. And I'm going to probably try to find a dish that goes okay with those, but do you have anything like that? And be open to suggestion. In a perfect world, and that world rarely exists, but again, that's why we do wine by the glass in restaurants. People can say, oh, I have a couple of ideas. Let me just bring you over a taste. And I love doing that, where I can just say, well, which of those did you prefer? And often people will go, I like this one, but I really like this one. It's like, well, we just hit a home run. Let's go. Giddy up on that. And so, in the big scheme of things, I think you're not any more than you're supposed to be able to grasp somehow these complex menus that we see anymore, precisely what the oyster foam meant on top of the pearled honeydew melon.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like eventually you're like, look, these ingredients sound okay. Is this a heavy dish? Is this a spicy dish? What do you want to tell me about this? And you pick stuff in a collaboration with the server. When it comes to, the bigger story of how do you learn about wine, I'm like, you taste, and you taste with other people, and you, if you can, taste blind, because that's how everybody, that's how everybody really focuses in on what it is that's there, and they taste what is in the glass rather than what they think is supposed to be in the glass.
When I used to operate restaurants and you're in the store every day, you'd have wine reps come in and you'd have your pre-shift meeting, and they would bring a wine and they'd taste the whole staff on that wine, to try to increase sales, for whatever they're bringing. So I would drink wine a sip or two every day, and it was the best way to learn. And since I've removed myself from working in the day-to-day operations of a restaurant, I feel like I've lost so much just daily wine knowledge. And it's not until I go out to dinner or, have an event or something like that where I'm even drinking wine, and then I drink it, I'm like, oh God, I miss this. But it's those little treats that you got working in the restaurant, trying some of these big names, like these big California cabs for free.
Yeah, it's really true. And I think we all like different things, and we accept and embrace that when it comes to food. I don't expect other people to like liver and onions, but my wife and I do. And we learned back when the kids were, just in college, the best way to get them to leave is to cook liver and onions. Oh. They'd be like, we're out. We're going back to school. It's like, oh, bummer. See ya.
What's a nice wine to drink with liver and onions?
Oh my goodness! Now now we're talking. I honestly, I would take a Nebbiolo Langhe. Oh. So it's a high acid, high tannin, but lighter bodied red wine, and so it has this kind of punchy cranberry note, but it also has some intensity and some earthiness to it. And it just kind of goes cray with liver and onions. It's a little overwhelming, I think, for some people. So, depending upon if they were into it, I might say, well, let's go the other direction. And let's just get you a nice Côte d'Aron that's going to be nice and easy and fruity. It's got some weight, got some power, but it's not going to, you're not going to go not only earthy, but like digging into the earth and all that stuff. So it kind of depends upon how cray you want to get. But to this point, tasting with other people is critical, because we don't all like the same things.
Yep.
Nobody's surprised about that in food. And yet we'll have, forgive me, but the idiocy of the 100-point system that says this is a 98-point wine. For who? Sorry.
I love that you brought that up. I think that's such a fruitful statement. I mean, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Nothing really is in life.
It shouldn't be. That's why if so, we would only need like one wine.
Exactly.
But we have hundreds of thousands of wines, because we have different moods, different seasons, different foods, and most importantly, different palates. Correct. My wife and I like things very differently. When if I make her a daiquiri, or a margarita, if I made her the margarita I'm making, she would look at me and say, what is wrong with you? Why didn't you put any agave syrup in here? I'm like, well, I actually did. She's like, she wants sweet. I want sour.
Yeah.
And my wines are the same way. She came to my winery a few months back to taste some of the new wines, and it was so funny because like one of my favorite obsessions right now is this grape called Sanso, and we made a Sanso, and it's like cranberry juice. I mean, it's just nuts. And most people just think, oh my God, this is so cool. It's light, it's fun, it's low in alcohol, and it tastes like cranberry juice. And I was like, so what did you think of the wine? She went, oh yeah, I really like these wines. And I'm like, how about the Sanso? And she went, oh, I hate that.
Brutally honest.
Yes, well, but because we don't like the same thing.
Right,
and we're
you
not
have
supposed
different
to.
palates. You're two different
Yeah,
people.
exactly.
I love it. Doug, we're going to go to our last commercial break. When we get back, I want to talk about Echolands Winery because you have the most amazing winery in the Walla Walla Valley of Washington State. And I want to talk about a couple of the books you've written because you've wrote a couple of amazing books about wine. So stay tuned. You're listening to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970 The Answer.
Over the last 30 years, Newman Ferrara, a New York City law firm, has evolved into a national practice focused on real estate, commercial, litigation, civil rights, class actions, and other complex litigation, representing many of the city's largest property owners, managing agents, and thousands of tenants. Newman Ferrara handles some of the nation's most significant class actions and civil rights matters. Newman Ferrara at 1250 Broadway in New York City. Go online to newmanferrara.com. That's newmanferrara.com. Listen to the firm's name partner, Lucas Ferrara, every Saturday at 10 a.m. on Dottie Herman's longest-running real estate radio program, Eye on Real Estate on AM 970. A real estate lawyer for 35 years, Lucas is a professor at New York Law School and is also a published author with books on real estate and New York's landlord-tenant law. Tune in Saturdays at 10 a.m. to hear Lucas's unique perspective and advice on Eye on Real Estate.
Welcome back to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970. The Answer.
Welcome back. Welcome back, Doug Frost. I'm so happy to have you on the show tonight. I feel like we're doing a great episode together. You've told us so much about wine, basic knowledge, a little more intense knowledge, but you've written a couple books, and I want you to talk about that.
Well, it's nice that people still read.
Yeah,
I'm glad of that. You know, I think writing a book for me is a wonderful way to have to coalesce and organize my thoughts around things, because as you can tell, I do tend to kind of just go off. And books don't allow you to do that. You need to become focused. You know?
Yeah.
So,
structure.
Yeah, exactly. So they were fun. I mean, the most recent one was several editions of a Spanish wine book, because wines of Spain have always interested in me. In fact, in general, I like to explore areas that are, at least in my view, less explored, places like Portugal, places like Greece. There are fascinating wines from all over the place, but I think it also speaks to why I ended up in the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
I'm originally from Portland, Oregon. We moved out to the Midwest when I was a kid, but I've always liked to kind of, I'll put it this way. I remember starting work writing for a Hong Kong-based wine magazine some years ago, and they said, okay, you're the first guy we've hired. You can write about whatever you want. And I was like, great. We're doing Oregon, Washington, Argentina, Spain, Portugal, and Greece. And they're like, wait, you don't want Burgundy? I'm like, what do I have to say about Burgundy that really anybody needs to hear? What do I need? You know, who needs to hear from me about Champagne? Frankly, there's a million smart people about Champagne, but I felt like, hey, I can tell people stuff about Washington or Greece or Argentina or what have you that they maybe don't know.
So your first book was released in 1996, and that's called Uncorking Wine. What's the premise of that book?
That was definitely intended to be a primer particularly for somebody in the wine industry, i.e., you just got hired as a clerk in a wine shop, or you just became a waiter in a restaurant that focuses on wine. Here, it's a 90-page book, and it literally was a series of questions that were intended to reflect, frankly, the questions I was asked when I worked the restaurant floor. What kind of stuff people asked me, I wanted to provide those answers. And then the second book in 2001, that was a more general book. I got to dig deeper. I profiled about 100 or so grapes because I felt like in 2001 people were still kind of focused on the Cab, the Chard, the Sauve, the Merlot, the Riesling. And it was like, there are a lot of really interesting grapes. So I did about 110, 115 grapes. And I love pointing out to people that book came out in September of 2001, otherwise almost exactly on the date we call today, 9/11.
Wow.
So had I done a book called The Wines of Afghanistan, I'd be off to the races. But yeah, it was.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about your winery, right? Because you have Echolands Winery in the Walla Walla Valley of Washington State. And I can tell you just by going on your website a few times, it looks absolutely stunning. And I am dying to go. And as I've mentioned to you, I'm going to make my way out there this year for sure. So this winery is located at 3281 Mill Creek Road, Walla Walla, Washington, which I just like to say that a bunch of times too. I think that's funny.
Yeah.
Tell me what kind of grapes you're growing at your vineyard.
So we actually have a couple of vineyards, one on the south end of the valley. And the south end of the valley actually drapes over into the state of Oregon. So Walla Walla Valley doesn't honor the state borders, as it were. And so half's in Washington, half's in Oregon. The winery's in Washington. And on the south end, it's hotter, it's drier, and so you see Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc and Merlot, a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon down at the bottom of the hill, but it's a sort of focus on Bordeaux varieties. And then on the north end of the valley, and we're actually in the northeast end of the valley at higher elevations up in what are called the Blue Mountains, and it's cooler and wetter, and so there's Grenache and Grenache Blanc and Sanso and Vermentino, but also some Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon, so that it's, if you will, a different climate for those particular grapes. Even though probably the most extreme example I would give is even though the two vineyards are 12 miles apart, the one in the south is in the desert, essentially, 8 inches of annual rainfall, and 12 miles away, it's 28 inches of annual rainfall because you're up in you're in the rainy part of the rain shadow, and so it's radically different sites, even though they're only a few miles apart.
Can we talk about how the climate and the landscape, the terroir affects the grape and how, it comes out in the wine?
Yes, very much. It's always that it ought to. That is to say, the wine ought to reflect the land. It's why I came up with the silly name of Echolands anyway. It was, to me, it was a sort of admission that this is our purpose. Our purpose is not to make a statement of our own. It's to echo the statement of the land. And
I love
so
that.
So, the idea it has always been not to make big, powerful wines with lots of alcohol and oak, partly just because I'm tired of that. I would like to drink wines that are more elegant. Let's put it this way: if you have lower alcohol in your glass of wine, maybe you can have 2 glasses instead of 1. I like wine. I'd like 2 glasses, please.
I feel like you like more than 2 glasses.
Oh, shh! Don't. Okay,
it's our little secret.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's so what the land itself does is Walla Walla Valley, and I'm simplifying, but it's true that Walla Walla Valley is a simpler place, let's say, than Northern California, which has many, many different soil types. The Walla Walla Valley has probably only about 4 dominant soil types. And if you really wanted to simplify it, you'd say, look, down in the basin of the valley, it's a lot of rocks. Rocks reflect heat. It gets really, really warm and dry down there. If you get up into the foothills, it's a bunch of basically what's called loess, which is dusty silt loam. And it's very easy for the grapevine's roots to get through that, just like it is through the rocky stuff. But it's definitely cooler, and it's definitely windier. and it is not, your grapevines are not going to ripen the grapes to the same degree that they do down on the valley floor. So
Right.
Most of our grapes, all our vineyards are on those foothills, because I'm looking for, like I said, not these overripe flavors that I don't appreciate and don't find compelling. But the whole place, just to, forgive me for telling the story, but it's a crazy story. The whole place, that's to say Washington, Oregon, is this lava bed from 15 million years ago, 12 to 15 million years. And then there was a cataclysmic event that happened about 15,000 years ago. And it was actually a series of events. But basically, imagine a giant lake that was about 26 or so square miles that is in Montana, so a long ways away. But it's held up in place by glaciers during the last ice age. As the ice age ends, the glaciers begin to melt and break, and a series of floods comes through the area. So we're talking about a 500-foot wall of water traveling about 45 miles an hour from Montana to the Pacific Ocean. It went right through Walla Walla, and it scoured everything in front of it. Imagine, of course, that people were living there at the time. We're going to call it a short but exciting day. It destroyed everything in front of it. But it also then tossed, if you will, all this stuff everywhere, all these rocks that are, if you will, in the basin of the valley, part of that's from the rivers and from the river beds that were created at that time. But then up on the hills, you get the dust that was hurtled into the air and that spent the next several thousand years just settling. And so it's literally this dust we call loess is just the silt loam that was thrown up in the air by the series of crazy, insane floods, destroyed everything in front of it.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, I want to talk about sustainable viticulture, biodiversity, and the local impact that's going on at your winery.
Yes. Well, we're about halfway a little farther than halfway down the road to have organic certification for the vineyards, which is to me very important. Yeah. So a couple more years and we'll have that. And we're just about halfway towards what's called regenerative organic certification, which is a newer thing.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I'm a believer, and I really do think it's the right thing to do. Now, there are various certifications and philosophies out there, and we could fall down the rabbit hole pretty easily talking about biodynamism and others amongst these. But I think the regenerative organic certification we've decided is the one that appeals to us because it goes, in our view, a little farther than things like biodynamic viticulture. You're asked to and you have to provide information about how you, frankly, pay your people. When we have a certification called Sustainable Washington. You have to report if the people who work in the vineyards have health care and things like that. And this all seems to me sort of de rigueur. If you're talking about sustainability, isn't sustainability something more than just, I didn't spray pesticides? Well, congratulations. But, it's like, what are you doing to make this place a better place for the vines, but for everybody?
Appreciate the land.
Yeah, and the people who live on it as well, the people who work it as well.
Yeah.
It's got to be all of that stuff coming together.
Amazing. So we're nearing the end of our hour, and I just want to make sure, since we have you on the line with us tonight, that we get as much out of you as possible, wine knowledge-wise. What is the best way for people who are looking to engage in the wine world a little, just how to taste wine better? Like, what are the 5 S's I hear about wine tasting?
Well, people are always like, well, you see it and you smell it and you sip it and you swirl it and you spit it, because it's really true that those of us who, I referenced earlier tasting 150 wines in a single day. If you ain't spitting, you ain't making it to quit. Okay,
Yeah.
It's like you got to spit, and frankly, you can taste everything without swallowing. You will smell it. And we often say, and who knows what the exact number is, but 80% of the information's in the nose anyway. So fine.
Is that true?
You don't have to,
I didn't know that.
Well, who knows what that actual number is. I will say that that's always been a difference when I teach sensory analysis in wine versus, let's say, spirits. When it comes to spirits, it's probably only like 60% of the information's in the nose. You really have to get the stuff in your mouth to weigh it, to ascertain how clean it is and how well it's been cut and distilled. With wine, I think, you put it in your mouth to most of the time confirm what you already decided. There's often surprises, though, where you go, I mean, we were blending wines at Echolands Winery just yesterday and the day before, and there was this moment where you smell the wine and you go, I'm not really sure. This is not very expressive. And then you taste it and you go, well, there's the expression.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's like that. And then there was another lot where it was quite the opposite. It was like, wow, this nose is awesome. And then tasted it and went,
it's a little flat.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like it just didn't have a lot of interest in. And so every wine is different. You have to respect that. And the best way, I think, to become sensitive to that is to, one, blind taste, two, taste with other people. Because you'll go, I'm not sure. This is a meh wine to me. And somebody else will look at you and go, what are you talking about? This is delicious. And you don't have to get, defensive about it. It's like, walk me through it. What am I missing? And for me, when that happens, and it does happen, half the time I'm like, oh, wow, okay, cool. No, I see exactly what you're talking about. That makes sense. Yeah, no, I like this wine better now. And about half the time I go, you can have mine. It's okay.
Yeah.
But once again, I think tasting with other people opens your eyes often to how different our experiences are, one. And for me, it's almost kind of a Zen experience just to focus on the smells and the nose and put everything else away. And blind tasting helps me do that because I don't know what this is. I'm not getting any clues. If somebody showed me a bottle of Chianti, well, I'd already have decided what it tastes like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's either going to be a good Chianti or a great Chianti or an okay Chianti. But when I don't know what it is, I'm like, wow, this has like this really kind of tart cherry. It's almost like cherry pits. I start to learn and notice things. And the best way to do it, I think, is just taste with other people. And the other tip I'll give people, taste 2 wines at a time. Never taste one wine and try to get information. It's going back and forth between the 2 wines that the brain goes, oh, I have some ideas. Let me tell you.
That's a great tip. I love that tip. I do want to mention that you are the United Airlines Global Wine and Spirits Consultant. And I think this is special because I always fly out of Newark Airport, where United is the hub. So every time I take a United flight and have a glass of wine, I can think, wow, Doug Frost picked this out specifically for me.
Well,
That's awesome.
I tried to. I knew which flight you would be on. Yeah. So, we tried to get that. But when you change the flight, I mean, what do you expect from us? We can't keep up.
Doug, thank you so much for your time tonight. I feel like you got to come back on the show in a couple months because this was the best hour and we haven't even really gotten into the nitty gritty of just the detail and nuances that you know about wine. Thank you for listening.
You're very kind.
Oh, that's the nicest thing I've ever been called. Thank you for listening to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates, Sunday nights at 9 p.m. on AM 970 The Answer. And thank you to my amazing guest this evening, Mr. Doug Frost. It was truly an honor to have you on the show tonight and listen to you share how you made such an incredible mark in the wine world. How lucky are we to have shared this last hour with you? So as I mentioned earlier, we're not doing Dry January here on Culinary Confidential. So to finish with the beverage series, next week's show will feature 2 friends of mine, Ryan Lindquist and Aldo Frederichini. Ryan is operating Lux Bar in Chicago, and Aldo is slinging liquor and wine here in New York City to all the hottest restaurants and concepts around town. That's the show. Have a great night.
The preceding program is sponsored by Shake It Off Live, LLC.